too big to wed. The rancher's daughter was to be sold, until one cowboy claimed her. Martha Collins had always known that life on the ranch would be hard. The Collins family ranch stretched across hundreds of dusty acres in western Texas, a land of long, golden grass, stubborn soil, and scorching sun. From the time she could walk, Martha had learned to help with the daily chores, feeding the animals, mending fences, and helping her father in the fields. Her hands were calloused, her boots worn, but she moved with strength and confidence. People in town often whispered about her size, tall and strong, with broad shoulders that made her look older than her years. But Martha had never let it bother her. She had work to do, and there was little time for gossip. Life on the ranch was not easy, though. The Collins family had always struggled to keep the land, especially after a few bad seasons of drought and low cattle prices. Martha's father, Samuel Collins, was a hard-working man, proud and stubborn, but the bills kept piling up. Mortgage payments, taxes, and the cost of keeping the ranch running weighed heavily on him. He had tried every solution he could think of, borrowing money from neighbors, selling some cattle, even letting a few fields go fallow. But nothing seemed enough. The family's debts grew larger each year, and the worry in Samuel's eyes deepened. Martha's mother, Grace, was a gentle, kind woman who spent her days cooking, cleaning, and keeping the household running. She tried to shield her children from the harsh reality of their financial struggles, but even her optimism had limits. Martha was old enough now to understand the seriousness of the situation. Every night, after finishing her chores, she would sit quietly on the porch with her father, listening as he spoke in low, tense tones about the bills, the bank, and the future of the ranch. Martha hated hearing these words, hated the helpless feeling that came with them, but she knew she had to be strong for her family. In those days, for families struggling with debt, there were few options. Some could sell their land and start over somewhere else, but the Collins Ranch had been in the family for generations. It was their home, their livelihood, and the source of their identity. Selling it was unthinkable. The only other option that the town seemed to whisper about was even more shocking: marrying off daughters to wealthy men who could pay the family debts. It was an idea that made Martha's stomach turn. She had never imagined being treated as a solution to a problem rather than as a person with hopes, dreams, and feelings of her own. Martha had 3 younger siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, who looked up to her. They were small and timid compared to Martha, but full of hope and curiosity about the world. She often helped them with their schoolwork, taught them how to care for the animals, and tried to protect them from the harshness of life on the ranch. The thought that her family might consider selling her in order to keep the ranch afloat filled her with anger and fear. She loved her family, but she could not imagine being treated as an object, traded like cattle or crops. Word of the banker's suggestion spread quickly through the small town. It seemed everyone knew about the Collins family's struggle and whispered that Martha, strong and capable though she was, might be too big to wed. The town's opinion was cruel, focusing on her size rather than her character or intelligence. They failed to see her courage, her determination, and her kindness. Martha ignored the gossip as best as she could, but it stung nonetheless. People's words had a way of lingering, twisting in her mind late at night, when the ranch was quiet and only the wind moved through the grass. Despite the worry and fear, Martha refused to show weakness. She rose early each morning, her boots crunching in the dirt, and went straight to work. She milked the cows, fed the chickens, and helped her father in the fields. She carried buckets of water, lifted sacks of feed, and worked from dawn to dusk. Her strength was admired, even if it made some people uncomfortable. She was practical, no nonsense, and unafraid of hard work. Her family depended on her, and she refused to let them down. Martha had dreams beyond the ranch as well. She loved to read, often stealing moments by the fireplace at night to open her small, tattered books. She imagined places far beyond the plains, towns bustling with people, markets full of colorful fabrics, and rivers that glimmered in the sun. She dreamed of freedom, freedom to make her own choices, freedom to live her life on her own terms. But each day, reality pressed down harder, reminding her that the ranch came first. The debt, the family, and the land all seemed larger than her dreams. Her father's face, lined with worry and sunburn, weighed heavily on her heart. Samuel Collins was a good man, but the pressure of keeping the ranch alive had made him tense. Sometimes he would speak in hushed tones to her mother late at night, and Martha would overhear pieces of that conversation. The words debt, banker, and arranged marriage filled the air like storm clouds. Martha's heart would tighten with dread. She could not let her father think she would agree to such a thing. She could not be a solution to a problem that compromised her dignity and freedom. One afternoon, as Martha repaired a fence with her father, he paused and looked at her. "Martha," he said quietly, "we may have to make some difficult decisions. The ranch, it's more in debt than I thought." His voice shook, and for a moment Martha saw the fear in his eyes. It was the kind of fear that made a person feel small, even when they stood tall. She clenched her hands, refusing to let despair enter her own heart. "We will find another way, Papa," she said firmly. "There has to be another way. I won't be sold." Her father looked at her, a mix of pride and worry in his expression. "I hope you're right, Martha," he said softly. He turned back to the fields, leaving her to her work. Martha's mind raced. She knew the town, the banker, and the world outside the ranch would not make it easy. But she also knew that she had to fight for herself, for her family, and for the ranch that had been in their care for generations. The days passed, each one bringing more attention. Townspeople visited the ranch, some offering sympathy, others offering cruel advice. Martha learned to nod politely and smile, all the while holding her head high and refusing to show fear. She spent long hours walking the fields, thinking, planning, and wondering if a solution would appear before it was too late. She could not rely on luck. She had to rely on courage, determination, and the hope that someone might come along who would understand that she was more than just her size or her family's debts. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch, a rider appeared on the horizon. The horse kicked up dust as it approached the main gate, and Martha squinted against the glare of the sunset. She had never seen this man before, a tall, rugged cowboy with a calm, confident presence. He dismounted, and his eyes met hers. There was something in his gaze, a sense of fairness and understanding that made her pause. For the first time in weeks, Martha felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this stranger could help, or perhaps he would simply be another person who judged her by her size and ignored her strength and spirit. She did not know yet, but something about his presence was different. The ranch felt less heavy, the air a little lighter, and for the first time she imagined that maybe, just maybe, she would not have to face the impossible alone. Martha continued her chores that evening, but her thoughts kept returning to the cowboy. She wondered who he was, why he had come to their ranch, and whether fate had sent him at just the right moment. The wind rustled through the tall grass, and she felt a sense of quiet determination settle over her. No matter what happened next, she knew she would fight for herself, her family, and the land that had been their home for generations. As night fell, Martha stood on the porch, looking out at the endless fields and the darkening sky. The stars began to appear, small points of light in the vast darkness, and she felt a sense of resolve. Life on the ranch would never be easy, but she had courage, strength, and hope. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe the impossible could become possible. The days that followed the cowboys' arrival were tense, but filled with a strange sense of curiosity. Martha could not stop thinking about him. His name, she learned, was James Callahan, though everyone in town simply called him Jim. He was a man of few words, but there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself. Martha noticed how he treated the ranch animals with care, gently calming skittish horses and speaking softly to the cows. He had an understanding of the land and its creatures that reminded her of her father, but with a touch of something she could not quite name, something comforting, steady, and protective. Despite his calm demeanor, Jim was not a stranger to the hard life of the plains. His clothes were dusty, worn from travel, and the lines on his face told stories of long days under the sun. He seemed to know the way the wind shifted across the open land, where water holes ran dry, and which parts of the fence would need fixing before the cattle wandered off. Watching him work, Martha realized that he was a man who had earned every inch of his freedom through effort and courage. There was no pretense about him. He was real, honest, and strong. Martha's family observed Jim closely. Her father, Samuel, remained wary. He had seen many men pass through the town, some kind, some cruel, and he knew that intentions were not always what they seemed. Yet there was something in Jim's presence that made Samuel pause. He noticed how Jim moved, how he spoke, and the way he carried himself with dignity. Grace, Martha's mother, found herself warming to him as well. There was a respect in Jim's eyes when he looked at the Collins family. Not pity, not judgment, but a quiet recognition of their struggles and their worth. The townspeople were not so kind. They whispered behind their hands and exchanged sharp glances when Jim arrived at the general store or walked through the dusty streets. Some of the gossip centered on Martha, how she was too large, too strong, too independent to ever be a proper wife. Others wondered why Jim had taken an interest in the Collins family at all. In a town like theirs, strangers were met with suspicion, and people were quick to judge. But Martha, despite her unease, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Jim's presence meant that things could change, that there might be a way to save the ranch without sacrificing her dignity. Jim did not waste time making idle conversation. He began helping on the ranch in practical ways, starting with tasks that even Martha found difficult. The ways today. He repaired a broken water trough, mended fences, and helped move cattle to better grazing areas. His work was quiet but effective, and Martha soon realized that he was not only strong, but intelligent. He could read the land, anticipate the cattle's movements, and know exactly what needed to be done before problems arose. Watching him work, she felt both admiration and relief. It was clear he had come with purpose, not idle curiosity. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Martha and Jim found themselves walking along the edge of the pasture. The wind was warm, carrying the scent of hay and the faint tang of horses. Martha could feel her heart pounding as she tried to find the right words. She wanted to know why he had come, why he seemed to care, and if he truly understood the danger she faced. "I've seen a lot of ranches," Jim said quietly, breaking the silence. "Some strong, some weak. Some people who give up too soon. But this one? This one has something special." He looked at her then, and Martha felt the weight of his gaze. There was no judgment, no hint of ridicule, just honesty. "You've worked hard. You're smart. And this land, it deserves someone who will fight for it." Martha blinked, surprised by his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. People often whispered about her size or assumed she was too rough, too stubborn, too proud. But Jim had not. He had seen her for who she was, her courage, her determination, and her intelligence. She felt a small spark of trust, though she kept her guard up. She had learned that trusting too quickly could lead to disappointment. Days turned into weeks, and the threat of the banker's arrangement loomed ever closer. The town still buzzed with speculation about what would happen to Martha. Each time she walked into the market or past the church, she could hear the whispers, see the pointing fingers, and feel the weight of their judgment. But Jim remained by her side, quietly assisting, never boasting, never drawing attention to himself. His presence gave her strength, reminding her that she was not alone, that she had someone willing to stand with her no matter what challenges came next. One afternoon, an argument erupted at the ranch. Samuel had received another letter from the banker, one that made the situation clearer and more frightening. The banker demanded a meeting to discuss the solution to the Collins family's debts, one that involved Martha being married to a wealthy older man who had little interest in her as a person. Martha's hands trembled as she read the letter aloud, and her siblings looked at her with worried eyes. "We can't do this, Papa," Martha said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside. "I will not be traded like cattle. There has to be another way." Her father sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Martha, I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice heavy with worry. "The bank, they will not wait. If we refuse, we could lose everything." It was then that Jim spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have to face this alone," he said. "There's always a way to fight without losing yourself in the process. Let me help. Let me stand with you." Martha looked at him, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and hope. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk yourself for us?" Jim shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "And because I know what it's like to fight for something you care about." "I see the fight in you, Martha. You don't have to do it alone." The words gave Martha courage she had not felt in weeks. She realized that she did not have to face the banker's demands alone. She had someone who believed in her, who respected her, and who was willing to help. The days that followed were filled with planning and preparation. Martha and Jim worked together to assess the ranch's resources, to calculate what they could do to pay off debts, and to find creative solutions that might save the family home without forcing Martha into an unwanted marriage. As they worked side by side, Martha found herself admiring Jim more and more. He was patient, thoughtful, and steady, the kind of person who did not panic in the face of trouble. He listened to her ideas, offered suggestions, and never dismissed her thoughts. For the first time, Martha felt that someone truly saw her as an equal, as a partner, and not as a solution to a problem. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Martha and Jim sat on the porch steps, looking out over the ranch. The air was warm, carrying the scent of the fields and the distant sound of cattle moving through the grass. "You've changed things already," Martha said quietly. "Even though you just arrived, you've made this place feel different. Lighter somehow." Jim chuckled softly. "It's not me," he replied.
"It's you. You've carried so much on your own for so long."
"I'm just here to help carry a little of the weight." Martha smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and admiration. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The banker was still a threat, the town still full of gossip, and the family's debts still pressing. But for the first time she felt hope. With Jim by her side, she felt that perhaps they could find a way to save the ranch and protect her dignity. That night, Martha lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the events of the past weeks. She thought about the whispers of the townspeople, the fear of losing her freedom, and the worry in her father's eyes. But she also thought about Jim, the cowboy who had appeared almost out of nowhere, bringing strength, understanding, and hope. She realized that life on the ranch could be harsh and unforgiving, but courage, determination, and trust could change the course of even the darkest days. Martha drifted to sleep with a sense of resolve, knowing that whatever happened next, she would face it head on. She would not be broken, she would not be sold, and she would not give up on her family or the land they loved. And in the quiet of the Texas plains, under a sky full of stars, she knew that someone was standing with her who would not let her face the coming storm alone. The morning sun rose over the Collins Ranch like a warning. Its golden rays glinted off the worn wooden fences and the dust swirling around the cattle, but there was no warmth in the air. Tension had settled over the family like a heavy cloud, and even the usual sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cows, the rustling of hay, and the creak of gates, seemed quieter, weighed down by the looming threat. Today was the day the banker had chosen to visit. He had sent a letter demanding an immediate meeting to discuss the solution for the Collins family debt, and everyone knew exactly what that meant. Martha felt a knot in her stomach. She had spent the past weeks preparing, working with Jim to strengthen the ranch and organize the accounts, but the banker's arrival would test everything. It was one thing to make plans quietly. It was another to confront a man who had the power to decide her future. She went about her morning chores with a sense of urgency, making sure the animals were fed, the fences checked, and the land ready to present a picture of stability. Every step she took was careful, measured, and purposeful. She could not afford to show weakness. Jim worked alongside her, quiet but alert. His presence was steadying, like a rock in the rushing river of her thoughts. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were simple, direct, and calming.
"We've done all we can, Martha," he said as they repaired a broken gate. "Now it's up to how you face the banker."
"Stand firm, and don't let him intimidate you," Martha nodded, appreciating the encouragement. She knew that the banker would use every tool at his disposal, pressure, charm, intimidation, to make the Collins family comply. But she also knew that she was not alone anymore. Jim was there, and together they had strengthened the ranch, showing that the Collins family was capable, resilient, and not a family to be dismissed or exploited. By mid-morning, the banker arrived. He drove a fine carriage into the dusty yard, his polished boots and tailored suit a stark contrast to the rugged, worn clothing of the Collins family. He was a man used to control, to wealth, and to having his demands met without question. Samuel Collins greeted him politely, but there was a tension in his voice that betrayed his worry. Grace stood behind her husband, offering a calm presence, while Martha and Jim exchanged a look that silently said, "We can face this together." The banker wasted no time. "Good morning, Mr. Dersman." "Collins?" he said smoothly, tipping his hat. "I understand you are struggling with your debts. I have come to propose a solution that will protect your property and settle your obligations." His eyes flicked toward Martha, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She knew exactly what he meant. "You mean?" Martha began, her voice firm despite the flutter of fear in her chest. "Yes," the banker interrupted, his tone polite but cold. "It is an arrangement that will benefit both parties. Your eldest daughter would marry a wealthy gentleman in town, the debts would be cleared, and the ranch would be saved. Simple, efficient, and in the best interest of all involved." Martha's heart raced, and her hands clenched. "I will not be sold," she said, her voice steady. rising above the gentle breeze that blew through the yard. The banker's expression flickered for a moment, a shadow of surprise crossing his face. But he quickly recovered. "Miss Collins," he said smoothly, "I am merely offering a solution. Refusal could result in the loss of your family home and land. You must understand the seriousness of the situation." Jim stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without a word. "She will not be sold, and neither will her family home," he said firmly. His voice carried a quiet strength that surprised even Martha. The banker turned to him, eyebrows raised, clearly unprepared for opposition. "Who are you?" the banker asked, his voice sharp. "James Callahan," Jim replied, unwavering. "I am a friend of the Collins family, and I will not allow anyone to treat them unfairly. This ranch, this family, and their dignity are not for sale." A tense silence fell over the yard. Samuel Collins looked at Jim with a mixture of relief and awe. Martha felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for the cowboy who had appeared at just the right moment. The banker, however, was unaccustomed to being challenged. He frowned, straightened his suit, and tried to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Callahan, I am not accustomed to being spoken to in such a manner," the banker said, his tone sharp. "I advise you to step aside. This is a matter of law, not personal opinion." Jim did not move. "Then we will handle it as it is," he said calmly. "But no one here will be treated unfairly. If there is a problem, we solve it together, without forcing anyone into something they do not want." Martha felt a swell of courage rise within her. The banker had expected fear, compliance, or at least hesitation. Instead, he found determination, unity, and a refusal to be intimidated. She took a deep breath and stood taller, her broad shoulders square, her gaze fixed on the man who sought to control her future. The confrontation escalated as the banker laid out his terms, describing the financial details, the debts owed, and the benefits of his proposed arrangement. Every word he spoke was meant to pressure Martha and her family into submission. But Jim and Martha listened carefully, noting inconsistencies and weaknesses in his proposal. They asked questions, demanded explanations, and refused to show fear. The banker's polished confidence began to crack under the steady resistance. Hours passed as the discussion continued, the sun moving across the sky and casting long shadows over the ranch. At times, Martha felt exhausted, but she refused to give in. Every word, every question, every firm stance she took was a small victory. She realized that standing up for herself was not just about saving her freedom. It was about preserving the integrity of her family and the land they loved. At one point, the banker tried to intimidate them by mentioning the consequences of non-compliance: foreclosure, loss of the ranch, and public embarrassment. But Martha, with Jim at her side, met his threats with calm logic and firm resolve. "We will find another way to settle our debts," she said clearly. "We do not need to sacrifice anyone's freedom to do it. This ranch has survived drought, storms, and hardship. It will survive this too." Jim nodded in agreement. "The Collins family is strong and resourceful. With careful planning and effort, they can meet their obligations without resorting to injustice. If you are unwilling to work with them fairly, then you will have no support from us." The banker's face darkened, and for a moment it seemed he might leave in anger. But then he paused, realizing that stubbornness would not win him compliance. He was used to being feared, not opposed. Facing a family united and determined, and a man like Jim willing to protect them, was unfamiliar territory. Slowly he adjusted his tone, softening slightly. "Perhaps there is another way," he muttered, though his pride remained visible in the tight line of his jaw. Martha felt a surge of hope. They had not yet won, but they had shown the banker that they could not be manipulated or intimidated. The standoff had proven their courage and determination, and it had begun to shift the balance of power. For the first time, she felt that the impossible might actually be possible. As the banker left the ranch that evening, the tension did not fully dissipate, but a sense of accomplishment lingered. Martha and Jim walked together across the fields, their footsteps slow and measured, savoring the quiet victory. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of hay and the faint warmth of the setting sun. "You were amazing," Martha said softly, turning to Jim. "I don't know what I would have done without you today." Jim smiled faintly. "You were amazing too," he replied. "I just helped hold the line. You stood firm when it mattered most. That's courage, Martha. That's strength." Martha felt a warmth spread through her chest. For weeks she had felt trapped, helpless, and burdened by the expectations of others. But today she had discovered something new. Not just hope, but power. She could stand up for herself, for her family, and for her land, and she could do it without compromising her dignity or freedom. That night, as the Collins family sat down to a modest dinner, the mood was quieter but lighter. Samuel and Grace shared relieved smiles, while Martha's younger siblings looked at her with admiration and newfound respect. They had witnessed courage in action, and it had inspired them. Martha felt proud, not only for herself, but for the strength she had helped cultivate in her family. Outside, the ranch stretched under a sky full of stars, calm and enduring. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying with it a sense of possibility. Martha knew that the battles were not yet over. The banker would return, the town would continue to gossip, and challenges would arise. But for now, they had proven something essential, that courage, determination, and unity could stand against even the most intimidating obstacles. And in that quiet moment, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jim, Martha felt a sense of hope she had not dared to imagine weeks before. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She had allies, strength, and the will to fight for what mattered most. The coming storm would test them further, but for the first time Martha believed that they could face it and win together. The days following the banker's first visit were tense and filled with quiet preparation. Martha woke early each morning, moving through the ranch with a mix of determination and worry. Every corner of the property seemed to whisper reminders of what was at stake. The cracked fences, the dry water troughs, the fields that had survived droughts and storms. The Collins family could not afford mistakes, and Martha knew it. She had spent countless hours planning with Jim, making lists, reviewing accounts, and discussing possible strategies. They had to be ready for anything the banker might try next. Jim had become an integral part of their daily life. He worked from sunrise to sunset, alongside Martha and her family, mending fences, repairing water systems, and tending to the cattle. But more than that, he was a steady presence, calm and unwavering, a source of quiet strength that Martha leaned on without even realizing it. She found herself thinking about him more often, feeling admiration for his courage and his willingness to fight for what was right. There was something reassuring about his calm demeanor, especially as the pressure of the coming confrontation weighed heavily on her. The townspeople watched closely, curious and judgmental, whispering in corners and exchanging pointed glances when they saw Jim and Martha working together. Some of the gossip focused on Martha's size, calling her too big to wed, while others marveled at Jim's willingness to stand with her. Martha had long ago learned to ignore the whispers, but their presence still added to the weight of expectation she carried. Each day she reminded herself that this battle was not about what others thought. It was about protecting her family, her freedom, and the ranch that had been in their care for generations. Finally, the day of the banker's return arrived. The Collins family had prepared as best they could, and Jim had gone over every detail with Martha, ensuring they had clear answers, plans, and strategies. The banker's carriage rolled into the yard, dust rising around the wheels, and he stepped down with the same confident air he always carried. But this time, he was met not with fear, but with firm resolve. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," the banker began, his tone smooth but with an edge of tension that had not been present before. "I trust you have considered my proposal." Samuel Collins straightened, his shoulders firm. "We have considered it," he replied, "and we have decided we will not allow Martha to be part of any arrangement that compromises her freedom or dignity." Martha's heart raced, but she held her head high. She had never felt prouder of herself, knowing that she had found the courage to speak her truth. She stepped forward, standing beside her father, and met the banker's gaze. "I will not be sold," she said, clearly, without hesitation. "No money, no promise, no contract will change that. I am a person, not a solution to your problem." The banker's eyes narrowed, and for the first time he seemed unsettled. "You misunderstand, Miss Collins," he said, his tone sharper now. "This is a matter of practicality. If you refuse, the ranch could be lost, your family ruined. You must understand the consequences." Jim stepped forward, placing a protective presence between the banker and Martha. "We understand perfectly," he said calmly, "and we are prepared to meet any challenges without compromising the freedom or dignity of this family. The Collins family has resources, plans, and the will to survive. You cannot intimidate them into submission." A tense silence fell over the yard. The banker, used to control and compliance, found himself facing opposition he had not anticipated. He tried to regain his composure, attempting to assert authority through legal terms and threats, but each move was met with careful, unwavering resistance from Martha, her family, and Jim. The standoff was quiet but charged, like a storm ready to break. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher and then beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the yard. The discussion was not only about the financial details, but about principles, fairness, and human dignity. Every time the banker tried to push Martha into submission, she responded with reason and courage. Jim supported her, offering practical solutions and counterpoints that showcased the family's strength and resourcefulness. The banker's smooth confidence began to waver under the combined resolve of Martha and Jim. At one point, the banker attempted to intimidate them with the legal weight of his proposal, hinting at foreclosure and loss of property. But Martha did not flinch. "We have not come this far to give up now," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "We will meet our obligations, but we will do it with honesty, integrity, and without sacrificing anyone's freedom." Jim added, "The Collins family is capable. We do not need to be coerced. You will not find compliance here through fear." The banker's face tightened, a mixture of frustration and begrudging respect flickering across his features. He was not accustomed to being met with such resolve, and it became clear that threats alone would not work. For the first time, he was forced to consider an alternative approach, one that required cooperation and fairness rather than intimidation. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange, pink, and gold, the banker leaned back, exhausted from the long confrontation. Martha and Jim, standing side by side, remained steadfast, their determination unbroken. The family's unity, courage, and strategic thinking had created a force the banker could not ignore. It was a quiet but powerful victory, one that had not yet resolved everything, but had proven the Collins family would not be broken. Martha felt a mix of relief and pride. She had faced fear, judgment, and pressure, yet she had remained true to herself. She had spoken her truth, stood her ground, and refused to compromise her freedom. And she had discovered something even more valuable: the power of allies, the strength of partnership, and the importance of unwavering courage. As night fell, Martha and Jim walked together across the fields. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of hay and earth, and the stars began to twinkle in the vast Texas sky. "You were incredible today," Martha said softly, her voice filled with admiration. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jim shook his head, smiling faintly.
"It wasn't me," he replied. "It was you."
"I just helped hold the line. You stood firm when it mattered most."
That's true courage, Martha.
Martha felt a warmth in her chest, a mix of relief, pride, and something she could not yet name.
For weeks, she had felt trapped, burdened by expectations, and unsure of how to face the banker's threats. But now she had proven her strength, not just to the world, but to herself. And she had found someone she could trust completely, someone who would stand by her side no matter what came next. The Collins family gathered that evening, their spirits lifted by the day's events. Samuel Collins spoke quietly to his wife and children, expressing relief and gratitude. Grace smiled softly, proud of her daughter and the family's unity. Martha's younger siblings looked at her with awe, inspired by the courage she had shown. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of hope and possibility in the air. But even as the family celebrated quietly, Martha knew that the final challenge had not yet arrived. The banker would return, and the outcome of their struggle would not be certain until every obstacle had been faced and overcome. Yet for the first time, she felt ready. She had courage, allies, and a plan. And she had learned that even in the face of fear and uncertainty, standing up for what is right can create change. As the night deepened, Martha sat on the porch steps, gazing at the stars. The ranch stretched out before her, quiet and enduring, a symbol of all she was fighting to protect. She thought of the long days of work, the moments of doubt, and the courage she had found within herself. And she thought of Jim, standing quietly nearby, offering strength, support, and trust. In that moment, she felt a sense of peace and determination. The coming days would test them further, she knew. The banker would return, the town would continue to gossip, and the challenges of life on the ranch would persist. But Martha was no longer afraid. She had discovered the power of courage, unity, and moral strength. She had faced the storm and stood tall. And she knew that together with Jim by her side and her family united, they could meet any challenge that came their way. For the first time in weeks, Martha felt a sense of excitement mixed with the determination. She was no longer just a girl facing impossible odds. She was a young woman capable of change, of action, and of standing for what was right. And as she watched the stars twinkle in the vast Texas sky, she felt certain that no obstacle, no threat, and no challenge could break the spirit of the Collins family. The morning after the banker's final visit dawned quiet and calm over the Collins ranch. The air smelled of fresh hay and earth, and the golden sunlight spilled across the fields, illuminating the fences, the grazing cattle, and the rolling plains beyond. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of relief and hope that seemed to hang in the air like a gentle promise. Martha woke early, not with the anxiety she had felt in recent days, but with a quiet determination. Today was about moving forward, about taking the steps to ensure that the family's ranch and freedom were protected. Martha's father, Samuel, was already outside, inspecting the fences with a careful eye. His shoulders were less tense than they had been, and there was a glimmer of pride in his expression as he watched his daughter approach. Grace, Martha's mother, tended to the small garden near the house, humming softly as she worked, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The younger siblings ran about, feeding chickens and carrying buckets, their energy unburdened by fear. For the first time in weeks, the Collins family felt like themselves again, not just survivors of debt and gossip, but a united, hopeful family ready to face the future. Jim stood near the barn, observing the morning activity with a quiet satisfaction. Martha approached him, her step steady, and smiled. "It feels lighter today," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude, like the weight of the last few weeks is finally lifting. Jim nodded, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the rising sun. "It is," he said. "You and your family faced the storm with courage. That's what made the difference. You stood together and no one can take that from you." Martha felt a deep sense of appreciation for Jim, not just for his help during the banker's confrontation, but for his presence throughout the ordeal. He had been steady, kind, and patient, offering guidance without judgment. She realized how rare it was to find someone who truly respected her, who saw her strength without wanting to diminish it. A sense of trust had grown between them, quiet but profound, and Martha found herself smiling at the thought. The day was filled with practical work, but it carried a different energy than before. There was purpose and optimism in every task. Martha and Jim repaired the remaining fences, checked water supplies, and made plans for the coming season. Every step was a reminder of what they had achieved together. The ranch was safe, the family was united, and Martha's freedom was intact. Each task became a symbol of resilience, a tangible proof that hard work, courage, and careful planning could overcome even the greatest challenges. As the afternoon approached, the town began to take notice. Word spread quickly that the Collins family had successfully stood against the banker's proposal and retained control of their land. Some townspeople shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered admiringly of Martha's courage and Jim's steadfast support. The gossip had not disappeared entirely, but it had shifted. Where once there had been judgment and ridicule, now there was a sense of respect, an acknowledgement that the Collins family was strong, capable, and unafraid to defend what was theirs. Martha felt a quiet pride as she walked through the fields, her fingers brushing against the tall grass. She thought about the months of preparation, the long hours of work, and the courage it had taken to face the banker and the town's judgment. It had not been easy, but the outcome was proof that standing firm in one's principles could yield results. And more than that, she had learned an invaluable lesson. Strength was not just physical, but moral, emotional, and collective. She had strength within herself, and she had allies who shared her values and supported her. In the early evening, the Collins family gathered on the porch for a simple meal. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Samuel spoke first, his voice filled with emotion. "I am proud of each of you," he said, looking at Martha with deep admiration. "Martha, you have shown courage beyond your years. You have protected this family and this land with determination and wisdom." Grace reached over and squeezed Martha's hand, her eyes glistening. "And you have reminded us all that we are stronger together," she said softly. "We faced fear and uncertainty, but we did not falter. That is a victory far greater than any money or land could provide." Martha's younger siblings beamed at her, their admiration evident in their wide eyes. "You are amazing, Martha," her little sister exclaimed. "I want to be brave like you someday." Martha smiled, feeling a warm glow in her heart.
"You are already brave," she said. "Every day you show courage in the small things."
Today we all learn that bravery comes in many forms, and that standing together makes us stronger. Jim, standing quietly nearby, watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. He had witnessed the Collins family's resilience firsthand, and he had been honored to play a small part in their success. When Martha turned to him, he smiled, a silent understanding passing between them. Words were not necessary. The connection was clear. They had faced the storm together, and their trust and respect for each other had grown stronger because of it. As night fell, the ranch was bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The stars twinkled above, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Martha sat on the porch steps, her feet dangling, watching the fields stretch into the distance. She thought about the challenges they had faced, the fear she had felt, and the courage she had discovered within herself. She realized that the struggle had changed her. It had made her stronger, more confident, and more aware of what truly mattered. Jim joined her, leaning against the railing. "You've grown so much through all of this," he said quietly. "Not just in strength, but in wisdom and courage. You've faced impossible odds and come out stronger." Martha looked at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. "You reminded me that I was not alone, that there was someone who believed in me, and that made all the difference." Jim shook his head, smiling. "You did this. I only helped hold the line. The credit belongs to you, to your family, and to the strength you showed every day. That is what made this possible." The days that followed were filled with quiet recovery and preparation for the next season on the ranch. The Collins family worked together, their bond strengthened by the shared struggle. Martha and Jim continued to collaborate on projects around the ranch, their relationship growing naturally as trust and respect deepened. There was a sense of partnership, a feeling that together they could face whatever challenges the future might hold. The town gradually adjusted to the new reality. The gossip slowly faded, replaced by respect and admiration. People began to recognize the Collins family not for their size or social standing, but for their courage, integrity, and perseverance. Martha's reputation transformed from the girl too big to wed to a young woman of determination and strength, someone who had stood up for herself and her family against overwhelming pressure. Over time, Martha realized that the struggle had given her more than just freedom from the banker's demands. It had given her confidence in her own abilities, a deeper understanding of the value of family and unity, and a profound respect for those who stood beside her in difficult times. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it, and she had found someone in Jim who shared those values, someone who respected her for who she was and not for what she could provide. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, Martha and Jim stood together on a small hill overlooking the property. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, and the distant lowing of cattle filled the air. Martha felt a sense of peace she had not known in months. "We did it," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Jim nodded. "Yes, we did," he replied. "And this is only the beginning. The ranch, your family, and your life are safe. The future is yours to shape." Martha smiled, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and anticipation. She knew the road ahead would still have challenges, as life on a ranch always did, but she also knew that she was stronger, wiser, and ready to face them. With her family united, her freedom intact, and Jim by her side, she felt capable of meeting whatever came next with courage and determination. As night fell, the Collins family gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of gratitude. The storm had passed, leaving behind not only the ranch and freedom, but also lessons in courage, unity, and the power of standing up for what is right. Martha felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had faced fear, judgment, and pressure, and had emerged stronger than ever. The story of Martha Collins, the rancher's daughter who had been too big to wed but refused to be treated as a commodity, became a quiet legend in the town. People spoke of her courage and determination, of the partnership with Jim, and of the family's ability to protect what mattered most. But more importantly, it became a personal truth for Martha, that strength, courage, and moral integrity were more important than fear, gossip, or financial pressure. And as the stars twinkled above the Texas plains, Martha Collins felt certain that she and her family would continue to thrive, guided by the lessons they had learned and the bonds they had strengthened. She had faced the storm, protected her family, and discovered her own strength. And with Jim by her side, she knew that together they could face any challenge, any obstacle, and any future that lay ahead.